Welcome to Podcash, the portable professional development podcast from CASH alumni. CASH alumni is the fastest growing association of professionals in care, health and education, and we're happy to have you here. This is where you'll hear from specialists and experts from across our network. Here's what's coming up.
Children's ability to think spatially is a greater predictor of mathematical success later than numerical knowledge.
Let's jump in to this week's episode.
Hello and welcome back to Podcash. I'm Dawn and I'm really lucky today to be joined by the lovely Helen Williams. I met Helen I watched admiringly from afar as Helen won an award at the Nursery World Awards this summer, and got in touch to badger her to ask if she would come and join us to record this episode of Podcash. And Helen happily agreed and said yes. So can you introduce yourself for our audience?
Yes, Helen Williams. I live in the southwest. I'm semi-retired. I started out as a reception teacher, having trained for working with 3 to 8 year olds, and became quite quickly very interested in how my young children were tackling the maths that was on offer then, which was a bit grim, to be honest, and a lot of worksheets didn't look like maths to me. I mean, I didn't like maths myself much at school. Certainly at secondary school, I didn't like it. And I was concerned that my children would have a positive experience about it, the ones that I work with. So I kind of started asking some questions. And I guess somebody heard a question and I went on a couple of courses, and then I moved over a few years into the maths advisory team in Cornwall, working with some really inspirational people, and joined the Association of Teachers of Mathematics. Been a member there for about 40 years, which has supported me and challenged me right the way through my career. So I've become increasingly interested in the development of early years children's mathematical understanding. And I'm a very happy member of the Early Childhood Maths Group, which I'm sure Dawn will give you some information about how to find that website, because we're very proud of what we've put on there and it's all free. So yeah, now I have a lovely time working with practitioners, developing sort of playful maths experiences, I think.
There's now so many different things that my brain wants to ask you, but I'll try and ask them one at a time. The thing that jumped out the most from what you just said to introduce yourself was that you didn't like maths, which I suppose, like, for someone who that is now your whole career in terms of looking at that maths element and the teaching of maths and the stuff that you've just said that you do, it's certainly a surprise, I suppose, to me. I didn't like maths. It always surprised us that my favourite maths teacher didn't like maths at school. He failed his maths GCSE twice and learned how to do maths in the army. But how do you go from not liking maths to making it, your whole like reason d'etre?
I think because I was focused on the children, what I was observing them doing, and that seemed way adrift from what was being offered in terms of the worksheets and the workbooks that were around in the 80s. And actually, I do still see some of that stuff around now, which is depressing after all that time, really. But it just seems so adrift. The children seemed so powerful and they said such amazing things that I just thought the two didn't match. And I so focused on the children, I think. I was thinking, well, what could I do with this to make it more interesting for them and make it more about the maths, really? And I tried a few things out because I was focused on the children, I think. I got really interested in the maths because it's like, okay, so this isn't quite so simple, is it? It's not quite so simple as matching an egg cup to an egg or writing the numeral the right way around in the box. It's not as simple as that. There's loads more going on underneath there. And I worked for a bit in a nursery, and that was like, wow, they're just so able to express themselves when they're involved in what they're doing. So I wanted to tap into that, I think. And I hadn't felt that myself at all in maths. Meanwhile, parallel to that, I was going to the Association of Teachers of Mathematics conference. I don't know how the first person got me there. I remember being driven there by my father and saying to my dad, just turn around, I'm not going. This is just too scary. And he said, just get out of the car, Helen. So there I began to play with mathematics myself.
That's great. And what a great thing to be driven by, that whole like learning, I suppose, through a child's eyes. That's really cool. So what has changed since the 80s, as someone who was in primary school in the 80s and the 90s, Like, what's different from when I learnt maths? Like, why might I not hate it as much if I went back and did it now?
Oh, that's that's a big question. I think, like anything, things change for the better and some things change for the worse. And there was a massive revolution in the sort of 90s where there was an acceptance that, for example, manipulatives, things you handle in maths lessons and play with and use to represent the mathematics that you're doing in your head, was important for everybody. And I was in the maths advisory team where we were helping teachers understand how to use manipulatives with all ages of children. I mean, our team went up to 16. I mean, I worked in the primary part of that, and we were working with year 6 teachers, with 10 and 11-year-olds, and they could see how the children could understand, say, fractions by moving Cuisenaire rods around or looking at interlocking cubes. And that was a really big and exciting time for us to be working in. There was a move away, I think, from just get your books out, turn to page 7, and you, by the way, Dawn, you're only on page 3, that sort of business. Move away from that to doing practical things and asking questions to get children to think about what they're doing and express what they're doing. We work with teachers looking at good questioning approaches right the way through from 4 to 11 and how we dealt with questions in the classroom. So that was all really exciting. And that did impact on the classroom. And there was the numeracy strategy took place. And that was based in research, actually, that idea of a lesson where you have start something all together, then you work in groups and you come back to reflect on that. But that just became like anything, when it grows and grows and grows, it kind of get a bit bastardized, I think, by everything. And then people got overwhelmed with literacy hours, and then it was a numeracy hour. And I remember a child saying to me once, I don't really like the lunacy hour. And I thought, well, that actually says it all. And I think now, if you are in a school where the leadership team respect the professionalism of the people in the team, and you are working together on establishing how you're going to teach, what the basic principles are, and how you're going to approach mathematics from 3 up to 11, say. If you're in that sort of school where that discussion is taking place over time, on and off, I think your experience would be quite different, because I think one of the big things is that in those schools, people say, well, why are we doing that? No, I don't think that works. Let's look at this. Or I've read this. Things are developing all the time, but you're still hanging on to the things that you know work for you. I think that would be different. I think you would find many more manipulatives probably being used. But I also think, because there is perceived pressure from Ofsted, and I think there is pressure from Ofsted, and perhaps senior leaders who don't really perhaps understand what goes on with younger children, put pressure on people to perhaps do things that they wouldn't do otherwise, perhaps move to written work a bit too quickly, formalised written work a bit too quickly before children really have got a grip of what they're doing, because they think, well, they're going to have to do that in the SATs, or the SATs are coming up, or we need to get ready for that, or Ofsted's coming in and we need to show that they can. I think if you're in that sort of place, some things maybe look fairly similar.
For me, that was probably part of the problem, because I'm not bad at maths. Like, I hate it, but I'm not bad at it. Like, I can do the maths, but that push to, I suppose, to write out how you got the answer and to write it out properly was a problem for me, because actually, you're talking about manipulatives, like, and things that people play with to find out the answers. I still do that in my head when I'm doing maths now. So I know, like, when you've got, like, how to set out a long multiplication maths equation, but in my head, I still have to count out all of the blocks of tens and all of the blocks of units as if they're real things. I have to visualize. I can't do mental maths without visualizing the actual units of numbers. If I had been allowed to play a bit more with maths, it would have made a bit more sense. Because actually, when I got into secondary school, I was terrible at maths, but I was really good at physics. And physics is just maths with a story.
There's so much to respond to that. I think that's interesting, isn't it? I do think that one of the things that has changed significantly is this. Well, I hope it has. I'm pretty sure it has. Is a realization that people aren't good and bad at maths. People aren't good and bad at maths. You get good at some bits of it, or you get good at it in some context, or you don't like that bit very much, not so good at that bit. There's bits, or at the moment, this is tricky. It's like an ongoing thing rather than a global thing. And one of the pieces of research that I read sometime was Anna Svard, and she said it's so quick how older children move from they're perhaps doing something, and usually it's to do with fractions, ratio, or algebra, and they're doing it at age 13, and they've been fine, and then suddenly they say, I can't do maths. It's like a global thing as a result of this one thing that they're finding tricky. And so I think if you spoke to most teachers now, they would accept that everybody has the potential to work mathematically, and it's our job as teachers to find out how to latch onto that and build on that, rather than, I think, certainly 40 years ago, you had and I'm using inverted commas in the air, lower ability group, a middle ability group, and an upper group. We know now that that doesn't help anybody, not even the children who are, inverted commas, higher ability. I don't like the word ability because it smacks of something permanent. And what I'm trying to say here is that these things are not permanent. You can achieve differently at different times. I mean, I would say now that I was a very low achiever mathematically when I was in secondary school, but I'd like to think I wasn't so much that now. I think that we know that higher achieving children, if you are labelled as being really good at maths, you see, you won't take a risk. You won't take a risk with what you do because you might be seen as getting something wrong, and your personality is good at maths, not getting something wrong. And to be a good mathematical thinker, you need to take some risks and try some things out and realise that sometimes that doesn't work. I need to go down another alley here. So high achievers act safe, and they don't like, I mean, you hear teachers say a lot, oh, my ones that are really good at maths, they don't really like problem solving. Because, yeah. So you've got to have a learner that is resilient and willing to take things on and confident enough and enjoy that challenge. And we don't get that by labelling children as poorer, middle group and top group.
That's really interesting. I think that idea that, I suppose that maths is problem solving, which sounds like really obvious when you say it, because obviously you're solving maths problems, but it was really off-putting at school. Like, even as a very young child, the idea that it was either right or wrong. So I think there was that idea that, like, well, you either get it right or you get it wrong, and actually maybe getting it wrong is part of the process of getting it right. Wasn't something that, like, I was ever taught. Like, this conversation is a revelation to me that, like, maths is problem solving in the same way that you would solve any other problem, that you have to be able to try and figure it out, and that might involve getting it wrong.
There is a school of thought now that says, well, you can't really do that until you've learned the maths. Well, I'm not of that school of thought, because I watch 3 and 4 year olds solve mathematical problems. You just need to go into a setting and you can see it happening. And you can build your teaching into that. I might do a bit of teaching and then give them something. So here we go. So we might talk a bit about, I'm going to take this off the top of my head now. We might talk a bit about filling up containers with water and which are full and empty and all of that. And then I might set my challenge, okay, find which one holds the most water. You can build your teaching and then you have the time afterwards where you say, oh, what did you, well done, what do you reckon? This tall, thin one, or why do you think that? How did you find that out? So you can sort of build your problem into the teaching. I mean, it's a nonsense to say the problem comes afterwards every time. I mean, one of my absolute favourites, if you said to me, here you are, here are a bunch of children, and I was like, oh, I was cold. One of my favourites is the pirate's gold problem, and you just need a pile of coins, and you need 2 pirates. In comes 2 soft toy pirates, a teddy and a pirate and a whatever. And you say, okay, can these pirates have a fair share of the gold each? They want to be fair. So you watch what happens there. All sorts of things happens there. Some children just pile it up. Some children, count it out. You can see where the children are coming from in terms of their ability to look at equality of quantity. You might want to talk about that. And then, oh, look, here comes pirate number 3. Now what? He wants a fair share or she wants a fair share. What can we do? Do you think it'll work? And then, of course, you can see how that might work into what amounts of gold work fairly if you've got 3 pirates or 2 pirates or 4 pirates. That's a lovely explanation. And so much teaching can come into that in terms of comparing amounts, counting accurately. The business of saying, I think there's a confusion with problem solving. People think it's a problem like those ones you get written down. Dawn has 7 apples, Helen has 3 apples. How many apples has Dawn got? That sort of problem. That's a word problem with a set answer. That is different to solving a problem mathematically.
This is Podcash, brought to you by Cash Alumni. If you're enjoying this conversation, please use your podcast app to follow or subscribe. so you never miss an episode.
That way of being able to present maths problems in that really playful way is, I don't know, maybe something that takes breaking your own way of thinking about maths first. Because I suppose if maths is joyless for me as a grown-up, I can't expect to deliver it with joy to children. So how do practitioners recapture the excitement that you have found for maths?
That has been my area of work for nearly 40 years, I think, really. And I think I try and do it the way I did it. There are two stories actually that are occurring to me that I must tell. Once I was in the last school I worked in before I retired. I went in one day. I was part-time at that point, and I was in year 5, 6, and I went in, and these children were like, "Mrs. Williams, you never guess what happened yesterday. We had a supply teacher." So I said, "Oh yeah, right. Do you know what she said?" She said, "Right, let's get maths over and done with and get on with something interesting." She said, we all went, "No, that's not the thing to say." These children were horrified that she had said that. I was, actually. But I just thought, we've won there with those children. I've always tried to do it the way I did it. So if we can get focused on the children, if we do something like Pirate Skull, go and try that. Just watch what your children do, make some notes and come back. Those are the courses that have been the most successful, I think, in changing people's attitudes, because you start focusing on the children and then you start thinking, okay, I need to learn a bit of maths here. What's the background here, or where do I go with this? And what we do have now in the last 20 years, certainly in the last 10 years particularly, are a growing number of resource banks that you can go to support that sort of work. I mean, I was in a meeting last week with some early years teachers from Durham, and they're working near Durham. They're working with Durham University mathematicians, and the mathematicians are working with the early years practitioners. So the early years practitioners come and say things like, "My children are really interested in circles, and we've done a bit of this, but can you just give me a bit of background on circles?" And so the mathematicians do some input, and then the early years teachers go back and this kind of enriching their knowledge level of maths in order to take that back to the children, but with the children's interests at the heart of that. And then what happens is early years educators say, and you can say, look at this now. Look at this now. See what the development is here. What research shows the development is in, say, counting or whatever it is. And then you are, I think, more confident about what you're doing because you know where you're coming from and going to, and you're still focused on the children. You're still focused on what they're showing you, what they're knowing, or what they appear to be understanding, and you're then thinking about, okay, I can build on that by doing this. So I think that is the only way of doing it, really, is by working in that way.
That makes sense. I really like the idea as well that the teachers and practitioners learning their own new maths things sort of through the kids, learning about new facts about circles, because the children are interested in circles, being able to go and sort of enrich their own knowledge to be able to then deliver it. And I suppose for people with teacher brains, that's an excellent way to learn things, to do it through that eyes of somebody else. How can people who don't have a background in maths and who might have maybe avoided maths generally, how can they find out more about the sorts of exercises like Pirate's Gold, like all of those things? How accessible is that sort of contextualisation of maths?
The Enrich site, which is based at Cambridge University, NRICA, Enrich Math, has been around for 25 years. In fact, that is probably one of the only places where you can find that sort of open-ended, low threshold, high ceiling task. So you start off, so every child can access that. And they've organised their tasks under sort of early years. It's really sort of, I would say, probably reception-y, top age group of nursery up to secondary. And they've organised those under sort of headings. There are some articles on there, background articles written by my colleague in the early childhood maths group, some of them. And those tasks are all trialled with children a lot of times. And they're quite simple to kick off, with your group. and that they are fascinated to observe what the children take out of it and what you get back from it. And if you email Enrich, I think they still do have like somebody that answers your maths questions on there. They always used to. That's a really good place to have a little look. Slightly different organises our website, the Early Childhood Mathematics Group website, and we have guidance and on there from birth to 7, and those are grouped under age groups, and it's not laid out quite like that, not like don't start with a task. You kind of look at the age group, and there are some things on there about the development within that age band and what you might be doing. I think it's probably slightly more teacherly. Yeah, I think it's good support for people. One area that's really underemphasised and not well understood is an area of the sort of shape of space, the geometry area with very young children. And yet research shows that children's ability to think spatially is a greater predictor of mathematical success later than numerical knowledge. And that's because if you work spatially, you are visualizing, you talked about it earlier, you're visualizing things. And if you work with jigsaws, or you're looking at maps, or you're looking at Lego diagrams, you're having to sort of predict what will happen if I switch this round, or should I, that piece fit there. All of that uses the part of your brain that you're going to need to mentally calculate and work with more abstract stuff when you're older. We think that is what it is.
Do you think that's got anything to do with, like, if you're picturing things, then you definitely understand them because you're seeing that stuff work, so you have to actually understand what's going on, or you're like figuring things out by actually seeing it happen. Whereas that, you're talking about like the just recall, like the understanding, like the having maths knowledge is possibly more like recall of facts, or sort of, so you could demonstrate that mathematical knowledge stuff by just remembering. But actually, to be able to do that spatial bit, you've actually got to be able to understand.
There's lots of words there that probably need unpicking, like understand, recall, and all of those words, which I think are often bandied around without much discussion about what they mean. Certainly, there's a difference between being able to recall something and apply that knowledge. So an obvious example of that is I might say 7 9s, and a child might give me the answer to that. But if I said, if I approached it a different way, maybe a child says to me, 8 8s are 64. And I'd say, okay, so 64, how many times does 8 go into that? They wouldn't be able to answer that the other way around. You see what I'm saying? It's like applying that is completely different to actually just recalling the fact. And you have to be able to do both. Neuroscientists and cognitive scientists are still looking at the relationship between spatial reasoning and later achievement. Certainly it's predictive. Whether or not it's causal, because they can argue about that for a really long time, but there's certainly a correlation, a really strong correlation. So it's something we should be looking at. I am encouraging us early years practitioners to look at with their children is look at doing jigsaws with your children. Don't just put it out and leave it out. Look at children, help them work out, suggest things like, do you need to turn that round so it fits? Or have you got 2 straight edges? So that's what I think you might need, 2 straight edges. Or if you haven't got one of those blocks, could you use 2 of any other blocks to fit those together? What sort of length plank do you think will fit in here? Those sorts of discussions where encouraging children to sort of reason about the shapes and visualise what might fit and what it might be like when it's turned round is sort of exercising that ability and the confidence to visualise and interpret things and then make a decision based on that is what's important. So I guess that, for me, that is about using the understanding. You're having to do it. You're having to apply it. I mean, we all know what the IKEA diagram thing, when you see it, you think, now, what screw is that? Is it one of those screws?
There's so much maths that people just do without thinking about it being maths. Like, I remember when I was working in welfare to work and we were supporting people with functional skills maths and sort of filling in clock faces and things like that you just do, and you never think about it being maths. But the minute someone says maths, you go, like, And actually that idea that you could play with Lego or you could do a jigsaw, that could be a whole maths lesson that you'd then, like, because you can take things out of it and build in that learning into what it is that they're doing and encourage that conversation.
It is maths, because maths isn't just numbers. Maths is about pattern and recognising similarity and difference, and being able to operate and solve problems, whether they're geometric or numerical. And so the ability of young children to be able to see similarities and differences and recognise that is a start of that, really. I mean, if you ever done these sort of the tangrams, have you seen those, the tangram puzzle? It's a square and it's cut into 7 pieces. There's a diagonal cut, corner to corner, then another diagonal cut opposite to that, and then another couple of cuts. You can Google it, and you end up with 7 pieces. And you can make lots of things with those pieces. You can make cats and dogs, all sorts of things. So that's a really nice way in. But of course, what you've got there is the area is still the same every time. So there are, and there's lots of things you can talk about in terms of similarity and difference there. But it's the idea of, and also at the end you say, well, can you put it back into your square? You started with a square. That ability to take things apart and see how they are constructed because you've taken it apart, and then you can put it back together again. That's what you do with numbers later on, isn't it? So that's really important. The spatial side of things is just as important as the numerical side, and then you've got measures, which is like applied number, really, isn't it? Those things are in the statutory programme for the early years foundation stage, just as much as the number is. And they're there because they're important. They're in the educational programme, and that is statutory. And lots of children find their way into enjoying maths through those tasks rather than straight number tasks. And so, that's a good way of building their confidence and their knowledge and their confidence to tackle things that they don't find quite so enjoyable.
This is absolutely fascinating. Like, I'm thinking about, like, even things like at school, like in secondary school, thinking about how all of the kids that did art and textiles were in the I Hate Maths sort of club, but actually a lot of that was maths. But again, that you don't think about it being maths, and all of us, I suppose, lost opportunities for being able to contextualise that learning by, I suppose, that segmented approach within like secondary education. With primary school maths, do you think that there's more to come in terms of what people are doing and what people are finding out about how children learn in primary school?
I think we're just scraping the surface. Seriously, I think we are. I mean, what we've learned about young children's early number facility has absolutely mushroomed in the last 10, 15 years. Well, certainly, and since, I have my own class, it's changed enormously. I mean, I had never heard the word subitising when I had my class when I started teaching, and that became a bit of a thing in the middle of the 90s. Like, you look it up and you did some reading on it, and now it's huge. There aren't many teachers in school that haven't heard the word. I think that will continue happening. There does appear to be quite a lot of research in younger children. There's a gap, I think, in terms of useful research for children between the ages of 7 and 11. I think quite a lot of that's maybe focused on children that aren't doing so well. And you think, well, actually, we just need some decent classroom-based research there. And we've got quite a bit of research on older children, often from the States. And what's happened with that sometimes, 11s and 16s, is that some of those findings are being sort of inputted into the 7 to 11-year-olds. And you think, hang on a minute, this research hasn't even taken place with this age group. So I think there is a bit of a dearth there in terms of really good, exploratory, useful classroom, useful research. But I think it will come. I mean, there's a new centre that's opened up at Loughborough, which is really exciting, called the Centre for Early Mathematical Learning, headed up by a great team of which of a whole host of people, cognitive psychologists as well as educationalists. And I'm lucky enough to be on the sort of outskirts of that, even though I live all the way down there. I went to the launch and we're involved in quite a few of the developments there. And I think things like we've started looking at children's attitude and how that affects. I think what we do, there's been a heavy emphasis on children's cognitive development. And I don't think you can isolate that from our emotional. So I think there needs to be more work on how we tackle children's emotional responses to things and how we invest in that, really, and use that to support them as they learn. Because we all know we're affected if we don't like something. We really want to make much effort.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I'm definitely a one for I'm not very good at that. I'll let somebody who is do that thing, and I'll concentrate on this thing that I am good at, because that means I enjoy it more. That's really encouraging that all of that stuff, I suppose, is still in the post when we have come so far since the 80s. But I don't think that the parts of our audience who are not education practitioners would forgive us if I didn't ask you what subitising was.
No, I thought about that as I said it. I thought that's probably not fair. You can Google it with a Z or an S in the middle. So subitising, or English versions have an S in it. But the original research came from the States, from Doug Clement's laboratory. He's based in Denver, and his work with his partner, Julie Sarama, is incredible. And I'll give you the link to their website so you can put stuff in the note. And it's the recognition that through finding out from research that we are able as mammals to recognise a smaller quantity without counting them. So I could show you 3 dots and you go 3. You haven't got to go 1, 2, 3. And there are animals that use that skill, that conceptual skill to recognise a small quantity in order to see if any of their babies are missing or all of those things. I'm not an animal researcher, so you'd have to Google that bit up. But we all have this conceptual ability to subitise a small amount, but only up to about 4. So when it gets to 5, if I showed you a row of 5 dots, you would probably need to arrange them into a dice 5, if you know what I mean by that, dot, 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 and 1 in the middle, to say, oh, that's 5, because a row is quite hard to recognise all in one go. So what we do then is we use that ability to conceptually subitise to perceptually subitise larger amounts. So if I showed you a random array of 7 dots, you'd be and I'd say to you, what can you see? You'd go, well, I see 2 there and 3 there and a 2 there. Somebody else would go, oh, I saw a 1, 1, 1, 1. So we use our ability to recognise a small amount to undo a larger amount. So now you can see how this business of taking numbers apart and putting them back together again and seeing how they're made up, like I talked about the diagrams, is all related, really. There are lots of lovely games you can play with children where you build that ability to their confidence in subitizing. If you've got children of your own, you will have seen them go things like 3 bananas, 2 duck. They would do that from quite young, and then we work on that with them to say, with a larger number, okay, what can you see there? Can you see 2 then, and another 3 and another 1? That ability to build that up. There's a really nice card game which I'll think of it, and it will be there in the notes, like you said, won't it?
It will. We're going to add it into the notes. I suppose I did tease a little bit at the start and say that I had met you at the through attending the Nursery World Awards and being there when you were presented with the award for your amazing new book. Can you tell a little bit about it?
Yeah, it was lockdown, and I had a phone call from a publisher who found me on Twitter and had read a couple of my blogs and said, oh, do you fancy writing a book? And my heart sank. I was like, oh, God, no, I don't. And I said, no, not really. And she was quite persistent. And I thought, well, actually, nothing else is happening. I could sit in the garden and do a bit of typing. But I did push really hard about the book I wanted to write. So this is the book that I wanted to write. It's full colour. It's called Playful Mathematics for Children 3 to 7. It has taken, I've got all my notes out that I've kept honestly on the back of envelopes, as well as in exercise books and all over the place and on the computer for years, to illustrate what I want to illustrate. So all of the descriptions of children talking are actually happened over the last 30, 40 years. Some of these notes are quite old. I've broken it up just into, I think there's 5 chapters. I need to check that. And I've looked at how we might work on developing children's mathematical reasoning, which is a big, big thing, I think, that we need to do, and we don't do very well yet. I've looked at what it means to be prepared to teach as opposed to preparing a lesson. So that's really what we were talking about in terms of doing a bit of reading up before and afterwards, like, oh, who's doing this? Where does that fit? You know, there's a chapter on the adult's role, like how we respond to things that we don't expect, or how we might work with children when it's a bit more open-ended, so we don't shut them down. So we bring them out to bring out what they know and build on that. And there's a bit, obviously, all the way through on what playful means and what that might look like sort of on the ground. So, yeah, that's it. It's got some fantastic photographs in it from amazing practitioners. So, yeah, I'm pleased with it. And I was very, very, very honoured to get that award. I didn't expect it. It's unusual for a maths group book to even come up for the award. So I was completely shocked when I got it. I was completely taken aback, and I am absolutely thrilled about it.
It sounds great. I mean, it sounds like it really embodies that whole idea of that like holistic approach to maths, and about maths not being easy to teach and not being easy to leave all that baggage behind, where you think, again, in the same way that you think, well, maths is just numbers, and you sort of exclude all those areas and think badly of yourself for not being a numbers person. It's easy to dismiss maths as just numbers, in that way of like, well, actually, you can still bring emotional baggage to maths the same way you can to an English lesson or to any of those other things, and to impact what's going on in your room. So I'm excited to see what more we can learn about maths from the research that's going on in teaching maths, but also what other maths discoveries are in the post, because it blew my mind when I found out that zero hasn't always existed as a mathematical concept. So like, what else is there that we're going to learn about maths, maybe through those kids that are being taught now to explore? Thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been absolutely lovely to talk to you. For me, talking to you, and for anybody who's listened to the podcast that we've recorded this morning, it's been really surprising for me that it's been so nice to talk about maths for such a long time. So thank you very much. Can you tell people where they'll find you online?
Yeah, I'm really only on Twitter, and my Twitter name is at Helen JWC, HelenJWC.
Amazing. Again, We will put the link to your Twitter handle down in the episode description for anybody who wants to find you. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you for asking me.
Thanks for listening to Podcash. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can also watch many of these conversations by heading over to cashalumni.org.uk and going to the CPD and best practice section of the site. That's cashalumni.org.uk.